2 million civilians are still down there, and the Council has ordered us to leave them behind. Fleet Commander Lyra Vale stared at the message glowing above the command table, reading it twice as if the words might somehow become less obscene the second time. They did not. Around her, the bridge of the vigilant dawn had gone silent. Beyond the forward glass, the planet Kepri turned slowly beneath them, its night side scattered with city lights, each one holding families who had been told the Alliance would protect them. Commander Daniel Walker stood near the tactical station, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair. 41 years old, a little gray at the temples, wearing the plain dark uniform of a Terran military advisor. He looked less like a war hero than a tired man waiting for bad news at an airport. "How long can the shelters hold?" he asked. Lyra turned toward him. 4 hours, perhaps 5 if the power grid remains stable. Dan checked the old silver watch on his wrist. It had belonged to his younger brother. Nobody on the bridge knew that. "Then we give them 4 hours. A junior officer looked up from the sensor pit. "Commander, the Meridian fleet has withdrawn." Another voice followed. "Council destroyers are powering down their transponders." One by one, the blue symbols on the tactical display faded, leaving 14 Avenari ships facing nearly 200 Vorith vessels. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear of death. Something worse. The cold realization that every promise made to her people had been weighed against politics and found inconvenient. The main screen flickered, and Grand Marshal Caro's Vin appeared in black ceremonial armor, calm and perfectly composed. "Commander Vale," he said, "your allies have made the rational choice. You have 15 minutes to surrender. After that, Kepri will be placed under Vorith control." Lyra's jaw tightened. "There are civilians on that world." "There are civilians on every world," Vin replied. "History does not pause for them." Dan's expression changed by less than an inch, but Lyra noticed. His eyes went still. "In the transmission," he said. Vin smiled faintly. "The human advisor believes he has authority?" Dan stepped closer to the screen. "No, I just know when a conversation is over." Lyra cut the channel. The bridge remained quiet. "Human ships are 8 hours away," she said softly. "The border fleet has abandoned us. No one is coming." Dan looked through the glass at Kepri's lights. Somewhere below, parents were putting children into emergency shelters, still believing warships were on the way. He remembered another evacuation, another promise, and a transport door closing while his brother stood on the wrong side of it. His fingers curled against the chair until the tremor stopped. "Maybe not," he said. "But we are already here." Lyra studied him for a long moment, then turned to her crew. "Bring the fleet around." The tactical officer blinked. "Toward the enemy?" "Toward the civilians," Lyra said. Outside, 14 ships changed course. Across the darkness, the Vorith armada began to move. Dan fastened his harness, checked the time again, and spoke in the same steady voice a man might use before a long drive home. "All right, let's make 4 hours feel expensive." 12 hours earlier, Daniel Walker had been standing in the same command center with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and a growing suspicion nobody wanted to hear. The defense map of Kepri floated above the table, all clean lines and perfect coverage zones, the kind of plan that looked impressive until somebody asked what happened when one piece failed. "Your outer patrols overlap here, and here," Dan said, pointing with 2 fingers. "But every response route depends on the Council relay network staying online." Admiral Saran Holt, the senior Avenari liaison, gave him a patient smile. "The relay network has never failed. That is not the same as saying it cannot." Holt glanced at Lyra. "Is this how human advisors always begin meetings?" Lyra kept her face neutral. "Usually with worse coffee." Dan almost smiled, then turned back to the map. "You also have no local command fallback. If the Council link drops, half your captains will wait for orders that are not coming." Holt folded his arms. "We are not frontier raiders, Commander Walker. We do not run fleets with hand signals and guesswork." "Neither do we," Dan said. "We use backups." The room cooled by a few degrees. Dan had learned a long time ago that people rarely got angry when they thought you were wrong. They got angry when they suspected you were right too early. After the meeting, Lyra caught up with him outside the command deck. "You embarrassed him. He will recover. You think the system is compromised?" "I think any system that cannot survive silence is already compromised." She studied him, irritated but curious. "What do you want?" independent navigation tables, hard copies of the orbital lanes, manual firing solutions, local authority for every captain if command goes dark. Lyra stared at him. That sounds like preparation for betrayal. Dan looked through the station window, toward Kepri below. It sounds like preparation for reality. 2 hours later, he found Noah Brooks in engineering, halfway inside an access panel with a flashlight between his teeth. Noah was 29, broad-shouldered, quick with a joke, and incapable of leaving machinery alone. "Tell me you did not come down here to ask for something legal," Noah said. "I need the fleet map copied outside the council network." Noah pulled the flashlight free. "That is absolutely not legal. So you can do it." "That is not what I said. It is what your face said." Noah sighed. "Give me 20 minutes. The first alarm sounded 19 minutes later. Not the gentle chime used for drills. This one cut through the corridor like a fire bell in the middle of the night. Red lights came alive overhead. Lyra's voice snapped across the ship-wide channel. "All personnel to battle stations. Unidentified vessels entering the system." Dan and Noah reached the command deck as the tactical display filled with hostile contacts. "Too many. Far too close." "They came through the inner gate," Lyra said. "That gate requires council authorization." Holt turned pale. "Impossible." Then every screen went black. For 3 long seconds, there was no map, no fleet status, no orders. Just silence. Dan looked at Lyra. "There is your failure." Emergency power restored the display, and a new message appeared across every console. Council Command had issued a priority directive. All Allied forces were ordered to withdraw from Kepri immediately. Dan read the final line twice. Civilian evacuation was not authorized. Before anyone could speak, the outer sensors lit up. The first Vorith ships were already moving toward the planet. The withdrawal order sat on every screen like a confession nobody wanted to read aloud. Lyra stepped closer to the command table and opened the authorization record. The council seal was genuine. The encryption chain was clean. Someone with the highest level of access had approved the order less than 6 minutes before the Vorith fleet entered the system. "They knew," Noah said quietly. "They opened the gate, then told us to run." Admiral Holt straightened his uniform as though neat fabric might restore the world he understood. "We follow the directive. We preserve the fleet and report the breach." Lyra turned toward him. 2 million people cannot report anything if we leave. Our ships cannot stop that armada. That does not make the civilians disappear." Holt lowered his voice. "Commander Vale, your duty is to the Alliance." Dan looked at the planet on the display. Emergency shelters were filling beneath the major cities. The evacuation towers had begun lowering families into underground chambers, but the system needed hours, not minutes. "The Alliance seems to have misplaced its duty," he said. Holt faced him sharply. "You are an advisor. You have no command authority here." "I know." Dan's answer was calm enough to make the room feel smaller. "That is why I am not giving you an order." Outside the forward glass, 3 Allied cruisers turned away from Kepri and accelerated toward the outer jump lane. Their blue markers blinked once, then vanished from the network. More followed. The bridge crew watched in silence as the defense line broke apart ship by ship. Lyra opened a channel to the withdrawing captains. "This is Commander Vale. Hold your positions until the civilian shelters are sealed." Only static answered. Then one captain replied, his voice strained. "I have 800 people aboard this ship. I will not sacrifice them for a world the Council has already surrendered." Lyra closed her eyes for half a second. Understood. She ended the call without condemning him. Dan noticed that. She was angry, but she would not make another commander carry her anger into whatever came next. "How many ships remain?" she asked. The tactical officer swallowed. 7, including us. Holt stepped toward her. "Lyra, this is finished." She stared at the council order, then slowly dragged it into the archive. "No," she said. "It is documented." Holt reached for the command console. Security officers moved before Dan did, blocking him without drawing weapons. Lyra removed Holt's access key and placed it on the table. "You are relieved." His face went still. "For refusing an unlawful order? For trying to obey one." The Vorith fleet began spreading into 3 attack groups. Their formation was patient, disciplined, and designed to leave no clear route of escape. Grand Marshal Ven's face appeared on the main screen without being invited. "Commander Vale, your government has chosen peace." Do not let pride make you an enemy of reason. Lyra looked at Dan. What would a human commander do? Dan watched the shelter count rise one slow percentage at a time. Some would leave, he said. Some would stay. Neither choice gets easier afterward. What would you do? For a moment, he saw Callisto again. The crowded transport. His brother waving from behind a closing barrier. Dan pushed the memory down, but not away. I already left once. Lyra held his gaze, then turned to her crew. All remaining ships, form on the Vigilant Dawn. We hold the orbital lane. 7 blue markers tightened into a single line. Across the system, Vin paused. Then his ships changed course and came directly toward them. The first Vorith attack wave crossed the outer defense line without firing. That worried Dan more than weapons would have. They are mapping us, he said. Lyra stood beside the tactical table, watching 30 enemy ships spread into a wide crescent around Kepri. They already know our positions. They know where the ships are. They do not know what we are willing to use. Dan pointed toward the planet's abandoned mining platforms, hundreds of cargo containers drifting between the moon and the upper orbital lane. Can those haulers still move? Noah checked the civilian logistics network. Barely. Their engines are old, and most of them steer like shopping carts with one bad wheel. Good enough. Load them with refinery scrap and push them into Corridor 7. Lyra looked at the projected path. That corridor is empty. It will not be when Vin sends his fast ships through it. She considered the idea for only a second. Do it. Noah transferred the route to the remaining captains while Dan divided the 7 ships into 3 uneven groups. 2 would stay visible near the planet. 3 would hide behind the thermal glare of Kepri's moon. The last 2, including Vigilant Dawn, would drift backward as though their formation were collapsing. One of the Avenari officers frowned. That makes us look weak. We are outnumbered almost 30-1, Dan said. We do not need help looking weak. The Vorith formation accelerated. Their smaller pursuit ships moved ahead, eager to close the distance before the defenders could retreat. Vin appeared on the main screen again. Your line is already breaking, Commander Vale. Save the lives you still control. Lyra leaned toward the transmitter. You seem very concerned about my crew. I dislike waste. Then you are about to have a difficult afternoon. She cut the channel. Dan glanced at her. That was almost human. I will try not to make a habit of it. The first pursuit group entered Corridor 7. Noah touched the final control. 20 cargo haulers fired their engines at once, pushing thousands of tons of refinery scrap into the lane. The Vorith sensors reacted too late. Their lead ships scattered, forcing the vessels behind them to break formation and slow down. Now, Dan said. The 3 Avenari ships hidden near the moon powered up and swept across the enemy flank. They did not aim for hulls. They targeted sensors, communication arrays, and engine radiators. Bright flashes moved across the tactical display as Vorith ships lost coordination and drifted apart. Vigilant Dawn turned hard to starboard, its artificial gravity dipping just enough to make every unsecured object slide across the bridge. Lyra braced against the command rail. Missiles incoming. Do not waste power on full shields, Dan said. Angle the bow and give me 3 seconds of thrust. That leaves our side exposed. Only if they can turn fast enough. Lyra trusted him. The ship surged forward, rolled beneath the missile spread, and passed so close to a Vorith cruiser that its dark hull filled the forward glass. The Avenari gunners fired a controlled burst into the cruiser's external guidance systems. Its weapons went silent. Cheers started across the bridge, but Dan raised his voice. Save it. That was the easy group. The tactical officer looked toward the far side of the system. The larger Vorith ships had not moved. They had watched the entire exchange, learning from every trick. Then Vin changed his formation. Heavy bombers separated from the main fleet and turned toward Kepri's cities. Lyra's brief satisfaction disappeared. He is going around us. Dan studied the distances. The bombers would reach firing range in 11 minutes. The defenders could intercept them, but only by abandoning the orbital lane and exposing the shelters to the rest of Vin's fleet. Noah looked at Dan. What is the plan? Dan watched the enemy divide the battlefield into 2 impossible choices. He wants us to chase the bombers, he said. So we are going to make him believe we did. Vigilant Dawn broke from the defensive line and accelerated toward the bombers, exactly as Vin expected. 2 Avenari escorts followed, leaving what looked like a widening hole above Kepri. On the tactical display, the main Vorth formation shifted toward that opening. Dan watched the movement without blinking. He took it, Noah said. Not yet, Dan replied. He is still deciding whether we are desperate or stupid. A private channel request appeared on Lyra's console. Grand Marshal Ven wanted to speak with her alone. He thinks I am ready to bargain, she said. Are you? Dan asked. Lyra glanced toward the casualty board. For ships remained fully operational. Another had lost most of its power, and the medical decks across the fleet were already crowded. I am ready to hear how he plans to lie. She accepted the call. Ven appeared against the dark interior of his command ship, his voice quieter than before. Your council signed the Kepri concession 3 days ago. The withdrawal order was not panic. It was payment. A document opened beside his image. Lyra recognized the seals immediately. Trade guarantees. Order access. A promise of peace in exchange for one outer colony. You forged this, she said. Check the verification chain. Noah did. His expression changed. It is real. For the first time, Lyra looked less like a commander and more like someone who had just learned her home had been sold while she was still inside it. Then continued. Leave now, and I will allow your command staff and medical vessels to pass. Stay, and every loss from this moment belongs to you. Dan studied the enemy formation instead of the screen. While Ven spoke, the bombers had slowed and tightened their spacing. The main fleet was moving closer behind them, confident the defenders were distracted. He is positioning, Dan said under his breath. Lyra heard him. Positioning for what? A clean firing corridor. He is buying 2 minutes. Ven's eyes narrowed. The human advisor cannot rescue you from arithmetic. Lyra looked at Dan. Would he honor the offer? Dan did not soften the answer. No. The medical ships would become leverage, and the rest of us would become an example. You cannot know that. His escort wings just moved to block the route he offered you. Lyra checked the display. Dan was right. The promised escape lane was closing. Something inside her settled. Not hope. Clarity. She faced Ven again. Thank you for the extra time. His expression shifted. What extra time? Lyra ended the transmission. Dan immediately opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, maintain the retreat pattern. Do not target the bombers. One captain answered, confused. They are almost in range of the cities. I know. Dan expanded the orbital map and marked Kepri's smallest moon, a mined-out rock with unstable excavation chambers running beneath its surface. Noah stared at the projected trajectory. That moon is behind their formation. Exactly. Lyra understood first. We are not breaking their shields. Dan nodded. We are moving the battlefield. The remaining missile inventory appeared on the screen. It was not enough to stop the Vorth fleet, but it was enough to reach the moon. Ven's bombers advanced into the narrow space between the defenders and the old mining site. Dan waited until every hostile group committed to the corridor. They are lined up, Noah said. All of them. Lyra rested her hand above the firing control. Once we do this, there is no reserve. Dan looked at the city lights below, then at the fleet that believed it had already won. We stopped having a reserve when the council left. Lyra pressed the control. Every remaining missile turned away from the Vorth ships and raced toward the moon. The missiles crossed the last 50 miles in silence, their guidance systems locked on the abandoned mining chambers beneath the moon's surface. Ven saw the trajectory change and laughed. They missed, one Vorth officer said. No, Ven replied, his confidence disappearing. They chose another target. The first missile entered an open excavation shaft. The others followed through neighboring tunnels, driving deep into the hollowed rock before their charges activated. The moon did not explode. It came apart in sections. Vast plates of stone lifted from the surface, followed by clouds of metal, ice, and mining debris that spread across the orbital corridor like a moving wall. All ships, execute the turn, Dan ordered. The Avenari formation rolled away from the debris field just as the Vorth bombers tried to scatter. Their tight formation, perfect for attacking the cities below, became a trap. Some climbed. Others dropped toward the planet. Their navigation systems filled with thousands of fast-moving objects, each one reflecting conflicting sensor data. They cannot see through it, Noah said. Neither can we, Lyra answered. Dan opened the independent maps Noah had copied before the attack. We do not need to see them. We already know where the safe lanes are. 3 Avenari ships, powered through narrow gaps marked on the old mining charts. They appeared between the bombers in short, controlled passes, disabling guidance arrays, and forcing the Vorith vessels away from Kepri. One bomber attempted to break toward the planet, but Vigilant Dawn cut across its path and drove it back into the debris cloud without striking the ship. City defense reports clear skies, the tactical officer said. The bombers are turning away. A tired cheer moved across the bridge. Lyra allowed herself one breath of relief. Then the deck tilted hard beneath her feet. Warning lights flashed across every station. A hidden Vorith cruiser had emerged from behind the moon, untouched by the debris and waiting for the defenders to commit. They predicted the maneuver, Noah said. No, Dan answered. Ven kept a ship outside the formation in case we tried something clever. The cruiser released a pulse that washed across Vigilant Dawn. Navigation vanished. Artificial gravity failed. Loose equipment lifted into the air as the ship began drifting toward the edge of Kepri's atmosphere. Dan caught the command rail with one hand and grabbed Noah's harness with the other before the engineer floated into the ceiling. A damaged panel burst beside them. Noah cried out and pulled his arm close to his chest. Dan pushed him toward the medical station, but another shock ran through the ship, throwing Dan against the console. Pain burned across his left hand where the overheated metal touched his skin. He pulled away, breathing too fast. For one sharp second, the bridge disappeared. He was back on Callisto, hearing alarms, watching a transport door close, knowing someone he loved was still outside. Dan, Lyra's voice reached him through the noise. He did not answer. She moved beside him and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. We are still here. He focused on her face, then on the lights of Kepri below. His breathing slowed. Yeah, he said. We are. Noah looked up from the floor. Engines are not responding. Lyra checked the fleet status. Only 3 Avenari ships remained in fighting condition, and all of them were low on power. Still, the shelters had gained another hour. Ven's image returned to the main screen. He no longer looked amused. An impressive trick, he said. But tricks end. Behind his flagship, new signals appeared at the edge of the system. Dozens of ships were approaching through the outer dark. The bridge crew stared at the display as hope spread across their faces. Lyra turned toward Dan. Human transponders? Noah studied the signal pattern, then slowly shook his head. The new ships cleared the interference, and their identification codes appeared. Vorith. 60 more warships had entered the system. Ven leaned closer to the camera. You bought your civilians 1 hour, he said. I brought enough ships to take the rest. For 3 seconds, nobody on the bridge spoke. 60 new Vorith ships spread across the tactical display, sealing every route away from Kepri. Lyra watched the last pieces of hope leave her crew's faces. Status, she said. The tactical officer swallowed. 3 ships can still maneuver. Vigilant Dawn has auxiliary power, limited steering, and no long-range communications. Noah sat against the engineering console while a medic secured his injured arm. We have enough reserve power for 1 engine restart, he said. Maybe 2 minutes before the core shuts us down. Ven opened a system-wide channel. His voice carried across the fleet and down to every emergency receiver on the planet. Citizens of Kepri, your defenders have failed. Your allies chose not to come. Lay down your resistance. And this transition may remain peaceful. Dan heard the words echo through the bridge speakers and imagined families sitting beneath miles of rock, listening in the dark. Ven was not talking to the fleet anymore. He was trying to make the people below surrender before Lyra did. Can we block him? Lyra asked. Not across the whole planet, Noah said. He owns the network. Dan studied the orbital map. 6 hours had passed since the fighting began. The nearest human fleet needed 8 hours by the approved corridor. The math was simple. That did not mean it was complete. Bring up the Hecate region, he said. Noah frowned. That is not a route. Bring it up anyway. A twisted band of gravitational interference appeared beyond the system, marked in red with warnings from 3 different governments. No military ship had crossed it in decades. Lyra understood immediately. Even human vessels could not travel through that. Not safely. Then they cannot be here. Dan looked at the clock. Not yet. Ven's reserve fleet began moving toward the planet in measured lines. The 3 surviving Avenari ships tightened around Vigilant Dawn, their captains waiting for orders that could not change the outcome. Lyra lowered her voice. I kept them here because I believed we could buy enough time. Now I have 3 crews with nowhere to go. You gave 2 million people 6 more hours. And what happens when those hours end? Dan did not offer comfort he did not believe. Then we make the next minute matter. An alert sounded from the lower decks. The engine core had stabilized at 12%, just enough for one final burn. Dan marked a path straight toward Vin's flagship. Noah stared at it. That is the opposite of an escape route. He does not know we cannot fire our main weapons. Lyra followed the line with her eyes. You want him to focus the entire fleet on us. If every sensor turns this way, the other ships can fall back toward the shelters and keep the bombers occupied. And Vigilant Dawn? Dan secured his damaged hand against his uniform. We become the loudest problem in the system. Vin's voice returned. Commander Vale, this is your final opportunity. Lyra looked across her bridge. No speeches, no promises, just tired people waiting to see whether she still deserved their trust. She opened the fleet channel. All remaining ships, protect the planet. Vigilant Dawn will draw their attention. One captain answered immediately. We will stay with you. Negative. That is an order. Dan moved into the navigation seat beside her. Engine burn ready. Lyra placed both hands on the command rail. Grand Marshal Van believes we are finished. Then let us avoid correcting him too early. The engines came alive, weak at first, then strong enough to turn the damaged ship toward the center of the Vorith Armada. Across the battlefield, enemy vessels adjusted their weapons and formed a wall around the flagship. Vigilant Dawn accelerated alone. Behind them, Kepri filled the forward glass, bright and impossibly peaceful. Ahead, Ven waited. Then Noah's console gave a single, quiet tone. A distorted signal had appeared beyond the Hecate region. It carried no identification code, only an old Terran emergency phrase repeating through the interference. Dan leaned toward the speaker. The message was broken, but 4 words came through clearly. Hold your position, Walker. The signal repeated through the static, weak but unmistakably human. Hold your position, Walker. Dan stared at the speaker as if the voice had reached across years instead of empty space. Admiral Hale, he said. Noah adjusted the receiver with his uninjured hand. I cannot lock the source. The interference is tearing the signal apart. Lyra looked toward the Hecate region. How many ships? No idea, Noah said. Could be 1. Could be a ghost bouncing off the gravity field. Ahead of them, the Vorith wall closed around Vigilant Dawn. Vin's flagship held the center, protected by rows of heavy cruisers. Dan checked their failing engine output. 90 seconds remained. Keep us moving, he said. We need every sensor pointed at us. Lyra opened a direct channel to Ven. You wanted my surrender. Come take it. Ven appeared on the main screen, his composure restored. At last, reason. No, Lyra said. Just your attention. Ven's eyes shifted toward his tactical officers. The first disturbance appeared behind his fleet. It was not a jump gate. Space bent in a long white line, then folded inward as if something enormous were pressing against it from the other side. Warning symbols flooded every display. A Vorith officer spoke too quickly for the translator to keep pace. Ven turned. Identify it. The line split open. A Terran destroyer emerged from the Hecate region with its outer armor glowing and half its navigation lights dark. It rolled once, corrected, and fired its engines. A second ship followed. Then a cruiser. Then another. They did not arrive in parade formation. They came through battered, scorched, and close enough together to make any safety officer on Earth lose sleep for a month. Noah let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Those lunatics crossed Hecate. Dan leaned toward the transmitter. Hail, this is Walker. We have civilians below and 3 friendly ships still operational. Static answered, followed by the dry voice of Admiral Marcus Hale. Copy that. Sorry we are late. Dan looked at the clock. You are right on time, sir. More Terran vessels broke through the distorted space until 40 warships filled the dark behind the Vorith reserve fleet. They carried no bright banners and broadcast no threats. They immediately divided into 3 groups. One moved toward Kepri. One cut across the outer jump lanes. The third turned directly toward Ven's flagship. Lyra watched their formation settle into place. They knew where to go. The maintenance beacon, Noah said. Your message got through. Dan nodded. 3 words, 1 set of coordinates, and the number of civilians below. It had been enough. Ven opened every channel at once. Terran fleet, you have entered a sovereign military operation. Withdraw immediately. Hale answered without raising his voice. Negative. You are out of position and surrounded. Also negative. On the tactical map, the human ships locked down the Vorith escape corridors before Ven's officers realized those routes had become the primary targets. Their fleet had turned toward Vigilant Dawn, exactly as Dan intended, leaving its rear exposed and its command groups separated. Ven looked back at Dan. For the first time, there was no certainty in his face. You knew they were coming. Dan flexed his injured hand and winced. I hoped. The engines of Vigilant Dawn gave their final warning. Lyra cut power, allowing the ship to drift clear as the Terran formation passed around them. Hale's voice filled the bridge. Terran fleet, protect the planet, isolate hostile command, and open surrender channels. Lyra glanced at Dan. He is offering them terms. That is how humans make sure everyone understands the next decision is voluntary. Across the system, Vorith captains began receiving the same message. Lower weapons. Cut engines. You will be protected. Ven rejected it for the entire fleet. Several of his commanders did not. Their ships slowed and went dark. Others turned toward the remaining escape lane, only to find human cruisers waiting there. Ven's flagship pulled away from its own formation and changed course toward a cluster of civilian evacuation transports rising from Kepri. Lyra saw it first. He is going for the shelters. Dan's expression hardened. The battle had turned, but Ven was not finished. He was about to prove exactly what kind of leader he had always been. Ven's flagship accelerated toward the civilian transports, forcing them together like frightened animals in open water. He is using them as cover, Lyra said. Dan watched the projected paths overlap. If the Terran ships fired carelessly, the transports would be caught in the confusion. Ven knew it. That was why he had chosen them. Admiral Hale opened a private channel. Walker, give me options. Dan studied the damaged Vigilant Dawn, then the cargo haulers still drifting near the old mining corridor. We can block his path, but we only get one chance. Lyra heard him and shook her head. Our engines are finished. Noah lifted his injured arm from the medical brace and reached for the auxiliary controls with the other. The main engines are finished. The docking thrusters still answer. Those are meant to move us a few feet, Lyra said. Then we only need to be a few feet in the right place, Noah replied. Dan sent the plan to Hale. No speeches followed. The Terran fleet shifted immediately. 2 cruisers moved above the transports, shielding them from Ven's sensors. 3 destroyers dropped below, creating a narrow corridor that appeared to lead away from Kepri. Ven took the opening. His flagship turned into it, believing the humans had left one escape route by mistake. Vigilant Dawn drifted near the corridor entrance, dark and powerless. Ven's ship came closer. 10 miles. 5. 2. Now, Dan said. Noah fired every docking thruster at once. Vigilant Dawn lurched sideways, pushing an abandoned cargo hauler directly across the corridor. Ven tried to turn, but the human cruisers closed behind him. His flagship stopped without reaching the transports. No explosion. No final charge. Just a warship trapped between people who had finally decided they would not move. Hale's voice reached Ven on every channel. Lower your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Ven appeared on the screen, furious now. You would risk a fleet for strangers? Dan looked past him toward the lights of Kepri. They stopped being strangers when you left them no one else. Ven ordered his remaining ships to continue fighting. Several refused. One by one, Vorith captains cut their engines and accepted surrender terms. They had watched their commander hide behind civilians, and whatever loyalty remained ended there. Within minutes, the battlefield grew quiet. Rescue crews moved first. Terran and Avenari ships recovered damaged vessels from both sides. The transports returned safely to orbit. Down on Kepri, shelter doors opened for the first time in hours. Families stepped into the morning light and looked up at a sky that still belonged to them. Weeks later, the Council tried to call the Terran arrival an unlawful intervention. Lyra answered by releasing the signed agreement that had traded Kepri for political peace. The hearings lasted months. The truth lasted longer. Ven stood trial. The officials who sold the colony lost their offices. Lyra accepted command of Kepri's rebuilt defense fleet under one condition. No civilian world would ever again be labeled expendable in a closed room. Dan returned to Earth with limited movement in his left hand and a silence he carried more gently than before. At a hospital in Colorado, he called his daughter. When she answered, he forgot every careful sentence he had prepared. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "I am coming home." Outside the window, evening settled over the mountains. Somewhere far beyond them, human and Avenari ships stood together above Kepri. Nobody celebrated the battle as if suffering had been worth it. They remembered the 7 ships that stayed, the people who kept working while afraid, and the promise that crossed a place no safe route could reach. Courage was not always charging forward. Sometimes it was refusing to leave when every reasonable voice said the cost was too high. Sometimes the most important thing anyone could say was not that victory was certain. It was simply this: "You are not alone. We are still here."